This is week 5, day 9. It's Wednesday, 13th. Routing and switching. So we did some review of switching. We talked about Unit 1 completion. There is skills-based assessment which is done. There was the in-class exam that the students worked on together. That one's done. And now some people still need to finish out the unit exam that they need to take in class with me. Unit 1 exam, and this one is similar to the Cisco exams. In fact, it's just like one of the quizzes. So we got that, and the chapter quiz. So I guess those are the things I was talking about. And we worked on configuring switches. We did that the following week. Now, leading up to that, we talked about memory in the switch. We're talking about connecting devices or phones. A phone could be a device to a switch. When this communicates, the switch remembers the MAC address, and that's how they identify where to send it back to. Another thing that happens in the switch, if I have, let's say, I don't know, a server over here and a PC, something people are not aware of. PC sends a signal, pins 1 and 2, send it in. When it goes to the server, it has to be on like 3 and 6. Okay, because this has to receive the signal coming in, and this is sending the signal out. So what a switch does is it flips it. Now, what that then creates, if you hook two switches together, you need to use a crossover. So if you think about it, let's say here's a server or another PC. I'll just use yellow. So this sends a signal here, it gets flipped over here. Now this is a crossover, so it flips it over again. Now it flips it again, it's going the right direction when it goes to the server. Now, this can happen automatically based on how new your internetworking operating system is inside your switch. Some switches manage that, and if you connect a couple older switches together, at least in our labs, or anywheres, we use the red cables, they all mark a crossover. This was the skills-based, and then we added to it on Monday. So there's also a connection here to another router and another switch. So connected to each of these, the students have switches. And we have a switch connected here. This device is connected to the cloud, and eventually this goes to the internet. This is actually the academic IT area, but eventually that works its way out to the internet. So now, the students were supposed to have their routers configured with router RIP. With exception here, we're using static addresses back and forth here. Highlight that a little bit. But then this area should all be router RIP. So they should all be exchanging information. Now on Monday, this is now, I like this for matching colors up. Week 6. Is that pretty? Week 6, day 10. Monday the 18th, and now I realize that day 11 was another snow day. So there is a video. I had WebEx open for students. I had one student hop on and we did some work together. WebEx was open for students, and then I recorded a session with some PowerPoints going over this Chapter 5, configuring switches, the latter part of that. Okay, so but on Monday, routing and switching, we did a little bit of work on the unit completion, and we did configuring switches. Switches boot, just like any computing device, right? They've got the iOS running config in the RAM, and this is where the stored configuration is. We talked about connecting to a switch through the console, and we went over some of these basic configurations. Let's talk about that in the next slide here. Password access logging, describing interfaces, encrypting passwords, and so forth. Next thing we talk about ports and interfaces. A port could be half duplex or full duplex. And then something else we talk about is the speed of the port. I had a scenario once where somebody wanted to put a hub between the network and the HVAC equipment. And I said, well, why do you do that? And they said, well, that's the only way it works. Well, here's what the scenario was. The HVAC was 10 million bits per second. And most switches were 100. So 100 million bits per second. So I just said, well, we'll go in and we'll change this port to 10 and we'll eliminate the hub. Because then nobody knew you could do that. Isn't that crazy? So you can also adjust the speed. Virtual interface, we can assign an IP, and that's for management of the network. Now you got to make sure the IP assigned is on the network that the switch is on. This newer switches will do this. So if you connected, let's say any of the switches, those 2960s in the classroom, you could connect them with any cable, and the auto MDIX would automatically make sure that the signal was either flipped or not flipped. Currently, even though we are doing some network layer things, most of what we're working on right now is data and physical link. In a layer 2 switch, one IP address assigned for management. Typically now we'll be using VLAN 99. There's no special rule. It has to be that, but that's what we use. And then we looked at the example. The switch, the IP has to be on the same network, and the default gateway would be the router. We talked a little bit too here about PCs seeing the server. Does an ARP, it's a MAC address, and those could communicate actually without any IPs. couple slides left. This was the breakdown for the skills based, and we'll leave that connected for a little while until we get through chapter 5 for the switching. So I think we're good. You can go back and double check. A couple people need to go in and make some adjustments and so forth. As you can see here, these two devices are connected to each other. This is the connection between those devices. And this is the connection to the device in the middle, 32, which is this device down here. These two devices are connected by Ethernet. This is its LAN on this router. And so here and here are connected. These devices have a common connection also. And you can tell here, these are the LAN for the LAN switches. So when you configure your switch on the lab, you wouldn't use the IP addressing in the lab, you would use an IP address on your LAN. Alright, and then this is the configuration. So just to make a connection, all of these are right in here. And when I talked about 13 and 16 be connected, that's where I was referring to this one. And connections down here, here. Then we have those connections into here, and we're running router RIP. So when you get done, you should be able to see all of these networks, as long as configured your switches correctly. The right addressing, does that make sense? And let me clean that up a little bit. We have one more router here. 22. And that too has a switch on it. Alright. I think that's it.